Welcome to Own Free or Die. I'm your host, Zach Jones. Should you hire a liberal at your business? As an entrepreneur, should you hire liberals? This actual question was really asked to me by a business owner I was consulting with, and I thought this would be a great episode. So I'm going to share with you the discussion I had, or the particulars of the discussion I had with him, and we're going to dive deeper into that. But first, we're going to touch on a couple news items here, or really just one main news item, but it has a few elements to it. The end of Twitter is here. Twitter is over. Did you hear? Twitter has ended. Well, that's what Fast Company is claiming. Let me pull this up here. If you were to go to fastcompany.com today, you would see a video. If you're watching this, you could see the little thumbnail there at the bottom. It actually says the end of Twitter. Doesn't even have a question mark after it. They're just proclaiming it as if it's already been decided. Twitter is over. According to Elon, it has more daily active users, DAUs, than ever before, but yet Twitter is over. And why is that? Well, it's because people like this guy here with his little skater hat on, they don't like the new Twitter because they don't have special treatment anymore. This gentleman, Jeff Beer, did a whole video on the topic, ominously titled The End of Twitter. But interestingly, in the last 24 hours, he has tweeted 5 times. So I guess Twitter is still around after all. Now, my favorite part of this is, well, I have 2 favorite parts, but I'm greedy. I'll take 2. One is what qualifies him to speak about a business, what qualifies him to speak about Elon's management style and management decisions and strategic decisions for the company as a whole. Now, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, well, Jeff here clearly has tons of entrepreneurial background and experience and running a business. He's done all this before, and that's where he's coming from. Well, if you couldn't tell by that was sarcasm. All Jeff's ever done is be a reporter, right? He's a writer and a reporter. He has a journalism degree, which, by the way, I just saw a separate study that journalism degrees are the most regretted degrees in the United States. Coincidence, I'm sure. And the only job he's ever had is as a writer and a reporter. Yet here he is for one of the biggest business news sites, Fast Company, critiquing the decisions that Elon is making now that he is the owner of Twitter. Obviously, that's ridiculous, in my humble opinion. But the argument he makes, and that many are making, is that advertisers are scared and they're leaving. And yes, many big-name advertisers have paused their advertising. That's true. They'll come back. I guarantee you they'll be back. We'll cover that when it happens. But what I wanted to discuss is, that's the point he's making. But, I've one of the companies I own, I've got decades of experience in the marketing and ad agency space, okay? And I've worked with these people, and I've seen how they operate for decades. And there is an incredible amount of overlap between marketing people, advertising agencies, and journalists, okay? They kind of bounce around from one to the other. They'll even joke about it. Oh, I'm going to the PR side of things. Oh, now I'm going to the media side of things. Oh, now I'm going back to the ad agency side of things. This is how they communicate. And they kind of live in their own little bubble. And ultimately, marketing people and advertising people at these big companies, they borderline worship journalists and people with any sort of media presence. They put them up on a pedestal because they're desperate for their approval, and they want positive coverage in their publications or blogs or websites, whatever it is, okay? They're desperate for it. It's just like these influencers you see on social media. They go and they'll do these supposedly honest reviews about a product, or they'll travel to a hotel and give you a review of the hotel. But yet, the company they're supposedly unbiasedly, is that a word? Reviewing, they gave them the hotel room, they gave them the product for free. So what are the odds that this person is going to give them a negative review? The odds are 0, because as soon as they give a negative review, the freebies are going to quit coming their way. And it's the same thing with these media and advertising and marketing people. They're desperate for the approval, so they get positive coverage, and it's just one big self-fulfilling cycle. But yet, notice how after all the doom and gloom, people like Jeff are still on Twitter. As I said, he's tweeted 5 times in the last 24 hours. He's still there. They're all still there. And if Twitter is so damn terrible and dangerous, that the advertisers can't make it there, how come all these people are still there if it's so terrible? If they can make it there, why can't the advertisers make it there? And yet, that brings us to what we know this is. It's another woke cause, right? It's just another woke Twitter mob pitching a fit, wanting people to do what they want them to do. Elon, he's a big boy. He's smart. He knew what he was getting into. They're going to try to make his life a living hell for the next months and potentially years. I forget who in the government, but someone in the Department of Justice has already said it's possible they could analyze his purchase or review his purchase of Twitter. Why? It's not an antitrust concern. It's not a monopoly. He broke no laws. He bought a company. Happens every day. They've said that about Elon's purchase of Twitter, but they haven't said a peep about an investigation into FTX. That should tell you all you need to know about how crooked our system is. These people, the Jeff Beers of the world that we just showed you, these left-wing politicians, these media people, I call them wannabe elitists because they haven't really earned the right to call themselves an elitist. But, if you're going to act like an elitist, at least if you're going to act stuck up, at least have achieved something, right? But these wannabe elitists, they look down on all the rest of us. They love this society, the way Twitter used to work, where they had the little blue check marks and no one else did, and they were viewed as a higher authority. And that's the way they want the world to work, where they get to decide what the narrative is. They get to decide what's acceptable. And the rest of us are just, we have to play by their rules and we're at their mercy. That's what they want, whether they admit it or not. I promise you, that's the system and the society that they want. And Elon comes along, and it's not just with his purchase. If you don't follow Elon on Twitter, he drops some nuggets just about every day. And he's talked a lot about journalism in particular. And Elon comes along and says, you know what? Anyone can have a blue check mark now. It's not just about how important you are. It's about verifying that you're a real person. That's what the check mark should mean. Well, these liberals, their heads exploded because historically, the only real people other than celebrities or public officials that had a check mark beside their name were people in media, journalists, reporters. And now they don't have this special treatment anymore. And now they don't get to control what is acceptable and not acceptable. And it's eating them alive. And instead of adapting and competing in the marketplace of ideas, they just want to destroy Elon Musk. That's what they want to do. So that's what all this is about. Twitter is not over. It's not over. It's not ending. The advertisers will come back. Okay. It's all going to work itself out because Elon is going to stand up. At least he has thus far, and I hope he does. If you stand up to the woke mob, eventually they'll leave and they'll go terrorize someone else. That's the way this works. They're constantly in search of people that will bend the knee and do what they want. And when you do that, of course, you've lost and you have no credibility. But that's what they're constantly in search of. And if you just ignore them and let them know, I don't really care what you think. I'm going to do what I want. I'm not going to bend the knee. Eventually they'll leave. Every time they'll eventually leave and go find someone who does care about their pathetic opinions. And I hope Elon continues to stand strong. Thus far he has. But that's what all this is about. Twitter's not going anywhere. Twitter's fine. This too will pass. So let's get back to the main topic today. Should you, as a business owner, hire a liberal? As I mentioned, this question was posed to me. They asked me that, then they proceeded to ask me if I've ever hired a liberal, which I have. And I've seen and sort of overheard this the exact same topic discussed in the past. So I wanted to dive into it today. So I'm going to share some of the things I told this business owner and kind of and expound upon it a little bit now that I've had some time to think about it further. What I wonder, though, when I think about this question, should you hire a liberal? I wonder if he was really asking a different question. And that was if what he meant was that, is it okay to not hire someone because they are a liberal? And my response, once I kind of thought that through, my response to him was another question of my own, which was, would you hire someone just because they had the same political beliefs or ideology as you? And obviously this person, by asking the question, he's a conservative. So I asked him, would you hire someone just because he's a conservative or she's a conservative? And I hope the answer to that would be no. Hiring, there are few decisions you're ever going to make at your business that are going to have more impact than hiring employees. And I would hope you wouldn't base such an important decision. You wouldn't elevate their political beliefs to be such a high factor in that decision-making process that could make or break the whole decision. I think it would be reckless to do that. But could there potentially be a situation where maybe you've got two fairly equal candidates, you're trying to differentiate between the two so you can make a decision, you can only hire one? Could there be a scenario where their political beliefs, their ideology, could come into the equation? I think it's possible, but with a lot of caveats. So that's what I want to discuss. So back to the question that he asked me, the second question. Have I ever hired a liberal? And as I said, I have. I've hired many. I've had liberal employees. I've had conservative employees. I've had employees I have no idea what their political beliefs were. And I think this is a really important takeaway. From all three of those groups, liberal, conservative, unknown, I've had good and bad employees, okay? I've had great liberal employees. I've had one of the worst employees I've ever had was a huge Trump supporter, okay? And obviously all variations in between. So political beliefs, in my experience, do not sort of predict or help you determine how good someone will be as an employee or how bad they might be. And I think that's a very important takeaway. Now, I know what you're thinking, because this is what this gentleman asked me. How did I know the ideology and political beliefs of my employees? You can't ask them that when you're interviewing them. You can't ask them who they voted for or anything like that. And you're right. I never would do that. But when you work with someone long enough, you get to know them. And invariably, you're going to learn enough about them that you're going to start to be able to get a feel for what their belief system is and their values and things like that. It's just invariable. If you spend enough time with someone, you're going to figure these things out. If it doesn't just straight out come up in conversation, which it usually does at some point. I remember in the fall of 2016, leading up to the presidential election between Trump and Clinton, I remember I was interviewing at the time for a position. And I asked a lot of the candidates during their interviews, tell me something positive about both candidates. Now, look, I get it. It'd be damn near impossible to come up with something positive about Hillary. I get it. But that wasn't what I cared about. I didn't care what they thought about either candidate or who they were voting for. I wanted to see how objective they could be, right? I was worried, I wanted to make sure they could work in an environment where if they had an idea that wasn't the best idea or they made a mistake, they could handle constructive criticism. They could handle disagreement. And for that, it was a wonderful exercise. But a few people responded in a way that kind of made it clear who they favored or disliked or whatever the case was. And by the way, I would ask that question again, just for your own hiring practices. Again, not because you care about their politics. Help see how understand how objective they are. But when you think about objectivity and how people get along and how they can handle disagreement, I think that starts to speak to how that individual is going to function within your company's culture. Now, culture is very important. It's also one of those kind of buzzwords that's trendy, and you always hear people talking about, we've got a great culture at our business and this type of thing. What does it really mean? I agree culture is important, but I've never really been able to put my finger on a great definition. And I've tried for years to come up with some definitions. I've asked people that I respect greatly, how they would define culture, work culture, company culture. And I've never come across or heard a definition that I just loved. And I don't know anyone that has heard a definition that they like either. I think a lot of us are kind of in the same boat. So, in preparing for this episode, I did a bit of research. And I actually found a definition that I like a pretty good bit. So this is from an article that was written by a gentleman named Johnny C. Taylor, who at the time this was written anyway, was the CEO of SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. And I'm going to read you an excerpt. This article was written by someone who appeared to have been terminated by their former employer because they were a, quote, poor cultural fit. And this individual wrote in, I guess, to see if that was, if that was legal or if that was allowed, if they had the right to do that. So I'm going to read a portion from this article. Quote, "Over time, I have come to view culture as the fundamental defining element of the workplace. If the work is what an organization does, workplace culture is how an organization does it. With that in mind, organizations should be purposeful in cultivating their culture. Your former employer may very well be within its right to seek a better cultural fit," end quote. I love that definition. Workplace culture is how an organization does its work. I think that's great. But don't miss what comes after that. Organizations should be purposeful in cultivating their culture. Organizations should be purposeful. Now, what that means, or at least to me, if you, the owner of the business, if you don't intentionally hire people and set standards that create the environment, the culture that you want, that you know, or at least you feel is going to be best for the success of your business, if you don't define that and if you don't cultivate it, then guess what? Your employees are going to do it. And I can just about guarantee you that if you let your employees create your company's culture, it is not going to align with a culture that is best for the business, okay? And I just couldn't agree with this excerpt more. Now, culture may not include what people believe, obviously, but if we're talking about how a company does the work, culture could absolutely include how people express themselves and get along with each other in the workplace, how they interact with each other. If someone is constantly annoying their coworkers, that is going to screw up your culture really quick, and it's absolutely going to negatively affect your productivity. Let me give you an example, just a hypothetical. Let's say you've got an employee that is just a hardcore environmentalist, right? They ride their bike everywhere. They have a hybrid car or an electric car. They're vegan, and they're constantly just criticizing people that don't share their beliefs and don't live their lives the same way. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. Obviously I have no desire to be a vegan. I have no desire to ride my bike everywhere I go. But people are well within their right to do those things. If that's what they want to do, awesome. Do it. But if they're to the point where they're almost militant about it, where they criticize people and judge people for not living their lives the way they live or believing the way they believe, no one's going to want to be around that person. Okay, that's going to damage your workplace culture. Another example, a real-world example this time, from one of my companies, is I had an employee who was doing great work. She had been with the company for the better part of a year. Clients loved her. She did great work. But then one day, she had some personal stuff start in her life. And unfortunately, she just wasn't able to really handle it. She wasn't able to compartmentalize. So she couldn't separate her work from the personal. And look, short term, that happens to all of us, right? Relationship stuff or a death in the family. These things can affect us, and we can't just forget it and go to work. I get that. But this went on for weeks and weeks, and eventually a better part of 2 months. And I had employees coming to me saying, I can't work with her. We can't get any work done because she's in a terrible mood. Nobody wants to be around her, but we have to be around her because we're a collaborative work environment. We can't get any work done. It's just a problem. So I met with her, tried to get her, situated, tried to get her to understand the importance of maintaining a good company culture, a good workplace. And she just couldn't get it together. And unfortunately, ultimately, we had to go our separate ways. And I think this ties in perfectly. It's not because she was going through what she was going through. It's because it was negatively affecting everyone around her in the workplace. And that destroyed the culture. It was damaging productivity. And we had to move on. So it wasn't a political issue, but it was a cultural issue. Now, I'm very conservative. Obviously, that's one of the main points of this show. But some of the best workers that I've ever had have been liberals. So if you're wondering, can a liberal be a good employee? The answer is absolutely yes. Okay. Doesn't mean all liberals will be good, just like you can't say all conservatives will be good, right? But just because they're liberal, they can absolutely be a good employee. Just remember, and I think this is a key part, we've been borderline brainwashed by the media and corporations and even the government. They love slapping labels on people, and they love defining what people are and how we should treat each other, because they're always trying to pit us against each other. It's a lot easier to get voters to turn out if you make the other side, life or death enemy. So they're always trying to label us and define what we are, when in reality, no two people are alike, right? You go home and talk to your spouse, you discuss enough issues or enough topics, you'll find disagreement, right? No two Trump voters are alike. No two Biden voters are alike. No two people, period, are alike. So the media's efforts to try to box us in and label us, they should be regarded as futile, but they're not, because again, the system loves pitting us against each other. But no two people are alike. But in my experience, the liberal friends that I have and the liberals in my life, we probably have more common ground than differing ground. Now, obviously, we may disagree strongly on some issues, like abortion, for example. I have friends who are not pro-life, and for the life of me, I can't understand how they can be okay with terminating a pregnancy and killing that baby. And I do view it as murder personally. I think you're killing that baby. I can't come to terms with that. But, we have common ground on a lot of other things. And this mindset of making a hiring decision just because they're a liberal label, whatever that really even means, or a conservative label, I think that's dangerous, because we're not what these polar opposites that the media makes us out to be. And yes, we may disagree strongly on some issues, but I guarantee you we have a ton of common ground as well, a lot of shared beliefs. So just keep that in mind, that just because this person may be a liberal, it doesn't automatically mean they're just a polar opposite enemy that's out to destroy you, which is what the media wants us to believe. So to eventually wind down and answer this question, there are tons of ways that an employee can distract and disturb the workplace. For the example that we're discussing today, where this gentleman asked me, it obviously seemed apparent that his workplace was pretty much made up of conservatives already. And, could that liberal disrupt the culture, I think, is what we should be looking at here. Not is the fact that they're liberal, is that the problem? Could they disrupt the culture? On the face, no. If they're standoffish about it, like if they cause issues based on how they behave in the workforce, like the examples I gave, that could be a big issue. Again, not because they're a liberal, but because of how they carry themselves. And if you have a bunch of people in your company already who do not maybe agree with them, and this person is outspoken and aggressive about their beliefs, that in itself could cause the cultural issue or a lack of a fit. And look, and people on both sides could struggle with this, by the way. It's not just, I don't think any liberal business owners are watching this show, but if you own a business and you're a liberal and you have mainly liberal employees, you may not like the idea of a conservative coming in. The door swings both ways. And if you have, an outspoken, Trump voter who wants to wear his MAGA hat every day, I can absolutely understand how that could cause a cultural issue at your company, right? I get it. It goes both ways. So disruptions could stem from anything, not just politics. And anyone that's going to cause disruptions could be viewed as damaging your company's culture and should be analyzed very closely before you bring them on board. A lot of people would say to me, and I'm just thinking about how people would respond to this. They would say, "Well, Zach, just don't allow conversation in the workplace. Just people are at work. They're not there to socialize. They're not there to talk politics. They should clock in, do their job, clock out, and go home." And I get that. And on the surface, that sounds great, right? That would certainly be good for productivity. But people talk a lot. They get to know each other. Depending on what industry you're in, you may have a very collaborative environment. And people are going to talk and form relationships, or at least attempt to. And these things are going to come out at some point, right? I don't think there's really any way around it. No matter how strict you are with in terms of how people need to spend their time at work, these things are going to come out. Certainly long term, maybe not. Maybe you can bottle it up short term, but at some point, this type of thing is going to come out, and people are going to figure each other out, right? There's really no way around it, and it's just not feasible to think you can just tell employees, "Hey, we're not going to talk ever about anything non-work related." That's just, I don't think that's realistic. So ultimately, the question is not, should you hire a liberal? I don't think that's really the question to ask. I understand the concern, but that's not the question you should ask. The question you should ask is, can this person, regardless of what their views and beliefs are, can they do good work while potentially being around people who are completely different from them without rocking the boat and potentially disrupting our culture? Can they get along with their coworkers? That's the question you should be asking, okay? Not what they believe, but sort of how they express what they believe and how they get along with people that don't believe what they believe. Because again, no two people are alike. And just remember that we are not always the polar opposites that the media portrays us and makes us out to be. So that's my opinion on this. That's the gist of the conversation that I had with this business owner. If you're considering a hire that you think is going to do great work and can be a good cultural fit, regardless of what their political beliefs are or what they believe in their personal life, if they can do great work and get along with your team and improve your culture and not take away from it, then hire them. Don't worry about who they voted for. And besides, people change anyway, right? You hire someone out of college, there's a chance in 5 years you're going to believe something entirely different anyway. So thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to this video. It helps us, so it would mean a lot to me. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here on Monday.